And then all it leaves is for me to do is to introduce our colleagues from Sports Wales, Stefan Barrow, Helena Snuggs and Amy Caterson from Sports Wales, who are going to talk to us about the school sports survey and how the data can be used to shape the future of sport. Stefan, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone for attending today. I know already some introductions have been made, but I'm Stefan Barrow. I'm the user research lead at Sport Wales, and I'm gladly joined today by my two colleagues, Helena and Amy, who will very shortly be presenting some results to you. But if we can just go to the next slide, please. Sorry, if you go back one. Thank you. So before we go into what the survey is in general and how it's conducted, and as I said, before Helena and Amy present the results to you, I always start these presentations, and I think it's remiss if I don't, by thanking all of those who were involved in the survey, from its design to its production, and the last couple of months especially, and in getting us to this point. I think it's important for us to reflect upon the fact that the school sports survey is truly a collaborative effort. It's not just the role of the insight team within Sport Wales, but across our partners from local authorities who are key in supporting the delivery of the survey on a school level, and of course the time and commitment that teachers and pupils themselves give to sort of completing the survey and getting it done. We really are appreciative and are conscious of the fact that it is a collaborative effort. Within Sport Wales, there are multiple teams, from our communications team, our relationship managers, leadership, and many more, who also have a key responsibility in helping us deliver the survey. And we're also indebted to those organisations and contractors that we work with to deliver the survey, and the extensive materials that we produce on the back of the survey to share the data. So Beaufort Research and Snap Surveys are key players in the delivery of the survey for us, as well as Select Statistics in helping us to weight the data to make it nationally representative. However, I think today it's right for me to pay special thanks to Data Cymru, who've been key in working with us to produce the extensive data tables that we've been able to at a national and a sub-national level in sharing that data with everyone who wants it and needs it. So as an insight, policy and public affairs team at Sport Wales, we'd like to thank everyone, but particularly today to Data Cymru, for contributing to that collaborative effort and that teamwork effort in delivering the 22 school sports survey. So if you take me to the next slide, please. So at Sport Wales, our contribution to the vision for sport in Wales, which is an active nation where everyone can have lifelong enjoyment of sport, is through our strategy. Now, within our strategy, there are 3 strategic intents which are clearly important to why and how we deliver the school sports survey. So firstly, to be truly person-centred, I think we must have an understanding of what drives or hinders young people in participating in sport. Now, I think that includes what motivates them, their levels of confidence to take part and to try new sports, and the barriers they face, and how all that varies by different demographic groups and indicators. Linked to being person-centred is ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to be active through sport. Now, clearly the first step is to understand if everyone is active, and if not, why not, and where should be our focus. Now, the survey goes a long way in understanding both these aspects, allowing us to put the right solutions in the right places for the right young people. And as it concerns young people, the survey is a fantastic mechanism for us and the sector to hear directly from our young people, giving them that powerful voice in shaping the sporting sector and the sporting landscape as they see it. A wealth of evidence does tell us that the positive behaviours and attitudes towards sport at an early age is a key contributor to having a positive impact on an active life throughout a person's life. Therefore, I think the survey is the perfect platform in understanding what activity and behaviour looks like in sport at an early age and what needs to change to enhance those early experiences. If you can take me to the next slide, please. So therefore, I think the survey is important as it helps us understand the where, the who, and the how often young people take part in sport, as well as giving us an understanding of their demand for sport in general and for particular sports. It also gives us a glimpse into the possible impacts of events in society, such as the pandemic, and what impact that has then on sport participation and demand. But I think crucially, the survey results help us to plan for future delivery in sport, for provision in sport, and investment in sport. And what's key, I think, is that it allows us to tell and sell a compelling story of sport within our sector and beyond. Next slide, please. For those of you who are less familiar and perhaps have never heard of the School Sports Survey, I think it's worth just recapping very quickly on what the survey is and how it's delivered. Now, the School Sports Survey is one of the largest per capita opportunities in the world for young people to have their say on sport. As you will soon see based on the response rate of this year's survey, I'm pleased to say that's still the case. The survey itself is delivered every 3 years or so, with the last survey coming in 2018. It was delayed a year because of the pandemic. The survey is delivered online to both primary and secondary school pupils across Wales, and every school in Wales is invited to take part in the survey. The survey is also available for teachers to have their say on school sport provision. Ultimately, through the survey, what we're interested in is the attitudes, behaviours and opportunities available in sport to young people. Take me to the next slide, please. And I started today by thanking everyone and mentioning that the School Sports Survey is truly a collaborative effort. Now, that calibration really has been going on for around 2 years. The preparation began with a partner consultation back in the summer of 2018. And that partner consultation looked at what improvements could be made to the survey and how we could enhance its delivery. And I'm not going to go into all the details this afternoon, but the feedback we received, I'm pleased to say, was largely implemented. We were also able to pilot those implementations in the winter of 2021-22 before the survey took part. And in the summer of this summer just gone, we were able to deliver the survey itself. If you take me to the next slide, please. And shortly before I hand over to Helen and Amy, I just wanted to touch upon, in that delivery of the School Sports Survey, what that looks like in terms of numbers. So the survey itself was open for a total of 16 weeks during the spring of summer this year. And the survey allowed us to capture the voices of over 116,000 pupils. Now, that's roughly 1 in 3 pupils in the country having their say on sport in Wales. We also managed to reach the voices of 1,000 schools in Wales. And I think that shows the breadth of voice that we were able to capture within the survey. 924 teachers also shared with us the state of their school sport provision, insight into why they make the decisions that they do, and what they further need to support them and to enhance school sport within their school. I'm also pleased to say that over 750 schools qualified for an individualised breakdown of the results as they pertain to their school and their pupils. We were also able to provide those reports to each of those schools 2.5 weeks after the close of the survey. And that was a feat that was really welcomed by local authorities and schools, allowing them then to plan for their upcoming academic school sport provision based on the results that they had. If you move us on to the next slide, please. And lastly, from me, before I hand over to Amy first, as I mentioned at the outset, the strategy and indeed the School Sports Survey is a means for us to work towards the vision for sport in Wales, which is our guiding light, or our Northern Star really. Throughout the entirety of the School Sports Survey work, we've emphasised the vision's importance in it, how it helps us and the sector towards achieving the vision for sport in Wales. To that end, in all that we present, be it in reports or presentations like this one, we've organised the results under the key areas of that vision. That is an active nation, everyone, lifelong, and enjoyment. Of course, we won't be able to go into every statistic today, and we won't even be able to explore the full extent of insight shared within the data tables and so on. But what comes next are what we believe to be the headline statistics that we really want you to be aware of, and which I think will be particularly useful for you and possibly your work. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Amy, who's going to talk through the Active Nation results for us.
The next slide, please. Yeah, so as Steph said, I'm going to speak about the Active Nation parts of the data. So that mainly pertains to just participation at a national kind of headline level. So can I have the next slide, please? So across Wales, 97% of pupils took part in at least one sport in the last academic year. Next slide, please. Participation varied by setting. So we have kind of 3 settings that we ask about once a pupil selects which sport they do. So as you can see, 50% of pupils participated in an extracurricular setting, 65% a community club setting, and 92% somewhere else. So that's kind of just like an informal catch-all setting that we put. So we kind of see extracurricular and community club as organised sport, and then this somewhere else figure could be in the park, at home, anywhere else. Next slide. And so we also have this figure of 3 or more times of participation a week. So that's Future Generations indicator 38. So 39% of pupils took part in organised sport outside of the curriculum 3 or more times a week from our most recent survey. And this, unfortunately, is a 9 percentage point decrease from 2018. Next slide, please. So this graph here shows the breakdown of the frequency of participation in a bit more detail. So as you can see, 39% take part 3 or more times a week, and 36% of pupils reported no frequent activity, so less than once a week. And this has increased since 2018, so that figure was 28% in 2018. And we can kind of see this pattern here as well, of pupils either seem to be doing no frequent activity or 3 or more times a week, which is interesting. So they sort of either seem in or out. Next slide, please. So we also look at community club sport, and as you can see, 174,000 pupils took part in sport in a community club at least once a week, which equates to 56%. Next slide, please. And then we also, so those figures were from the participation survey, which is the pupil filled in survey. And then we also, as Steph mentioned, ask a teacher survey. So we ask how many minutes of curricular PE are provided on average per week. So as you can see, in both primary and secondary schools, this has decreased in 2022 to 93 minutes. Next slide, please. We also this year asked about online provision of PE in sport following the pandemic. So 78% of schools said they've provided PE in sport online since the start of the pandemic, 32% since the start of the 2021-22 academic year, and 9% intend to use it regularly in the future. And then we also asked teachers another new question this year of what influence both their curricular and extracurricular sport offer. So this table here shows the factors that predominantly influence the curricular sport offer. So the top kind of 3 reasons are sport facilities, access to necessary equipment, and staff skills. So they seem very like resource and facility based, which is really interesting. And it was similar for extracurricular offers as well. Next slide, please. And now I will pass on to Helena to discuss the everyone section.
Hiya, yeah, the everyone section looks at exploring those statistics in a bit more detail. So they're broken down by demographic factors. And within this section, what we're seeing is that those inequalities that we've been familiar with are continuing to be evidenced. But there's also some evidence to suggest that those inequalities are worsening and the gaps are getting wider. So if we go to the next slide, it should be a graph, this one, yes, please, thank you. So this is looking at the frequency of participation broken down by the gender groups. So at that 3 or more times per week category, we can see that boys are more likely to be participating this frequently compared to girls or those who identified as other. And then if we look at that once a week and twice per week rate of participation, we can see that it's a bit more comparable across the gender groups. But then when we look at that no frequent activity, so that's participation less than once per week, we can see that those who identified their gender as other are most likely to report no frequent activity, followed by girls and then followed by boys. So if we look at how this compares to 2018, we can see that the greatest decline has been observed amongst those who identified their gender as other and those who identified their gender as being girl, and then followed by boys. And then again, if we go to the next slide, we can see that the greatest inclines in no frequent activity have occurred amongst those who identified their gender as other and those reporting their gender as girls, and then followed by boys. So if we move on to the next slide, this is looking specifically at ethnicity, and this table looks at the proportion of pupils who participated 3 or more times per week. And what we can see is that those from mixed or multiple ethnic groups or white ethnic groups were more likely to participate this frequently compared to those from Black, Asian or other ethnic groups. And then if we go to the next slide, we can see that those from Black, Asian or other ethnic groups had the greatest decline in the proportion of pupils participating this frequently. Additionally, we know that those from Asian ethnic groups are most likely to report no frequent activity. If we go to the next slide. So this is looking at deprivation. For the school sports survey, we use the proportion of pupils who are eligible to receive free school meals as an index of socioeconomic deprivation. And those are broken down into quartiles. So free school meal quartile 1 on the far left represents the pupils from the least deprived communities. And then on the far right, from free school meal quartile 4 represents the most deprived pupils. And what we can see is that those from the most deprived communities are least likely to be participating 3 or more times per week. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that there's a 15 percentage point difference between free school meal band 1 and free school meal band 4. So quite a big difference between those two groups. If we go to the next slide, we can see that the proportion of pupils participating 3 or more times per week in free school meal band 4 has declined to a greater extent since 2018 compared to free school meal band 1. So if we go to the next slide, so this is looking at deprivation and participation in a community sport at least once per week. And again, we can see that same trend of those in the most deprived groups participating, at least likely to participate in a community sport at least once a week. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that there's a 20 percentage point difference between free school meal band 1 and free school meal band 4. And again, if we go to the next slide, we can look at the difference since 2018. And again, those in free school meal band 4 have experienced a greater decline in the proportion of pupils participating in a community sport at least once a week compared to those in the least deprived groups. So if we carry on to the next slide, this is looking at frequency of participation broken down by whether pupils reported having a disability or impairment or no disability or impairment. And again, what we can see is that those with no disability or impairment are more likely to be participating 3 or more times per week compared to those with a disability or impairment. And then looking at that once or twice per week frequency of participation, rates are more similar. But then if we look at the no frequent activity category, we can see that those with a disability or impairment are more likely to report no frequent activity compared to those with no disability or impairment. And again, if we look at that change since 2018, we can see that there's been a greater decline amongst those with a disability or impairment participating 3 or more times per week. But then if we look at no frequent activity, we can see, oh, sorry, those arrows are upside down. There's been the greatest incline in the proportion of pupils with no frequent activity amongst those with a disability or impairment compared to those without. So if we go to the next slide, we also ask about the resources available to provide support for pupils with a disability, impairment or learning difficulty. And 92% of teachers said that there was an opportunity for disabled pupils, pupils with an impairment or additional learning need to participate in PE lessons all of the time. So if we go to the next slide, we ask about the resources that are available for teachers to be able to provide. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that more than 3/4 of teachers said that they had, oh, sorry, if we could go back. I thought there was another slide, but 3/4 of teachers said that they had accessible space, that they were confident in modifying planned tasks, and that they had additional people to support inclusion. But less than 2/3 said that they had the equipment in school to enable inclusion. So if we go to the next slide. So this is looking at the proportion of Welsh speakers participating 3 or more times per week, and we can see that 46% of Welsh speakers participated this frequently compared to 35% of non-Welsh speakers. So the trend sort of breaks there, with more Welsh speakers participating this frequently compared to non-Welsh speakers. Obviously, this rate has declined since 2018, but it's declined to an equal proportion across Welsh speakers and non-Welsh speakers. And if we go to the next slide, I think we're back to Amy looking at lifelong.
Yeah, so we see the vision as for life. So this data, the data we're going to present now kind of looks at participation by year group and some other factors by year group. So if I could have the next slide, please. So yeah, we can see here participation by year group varies. It peaks at around year 7. This is different from 2018. So typically we'd see the peak around year 6. So it seems to be slightly later from this survey cycle data. And then you can also see there's a slight increase in year 10 in participation, and then it goes back down year 11. Next slide, please. We also ask a question of how much pupils feel that sport and PE help them to achieve a healthy lifestyle. So interestingly here, you can see that primary school pupils are more likely to think that PE and sport help them a lot to have a healthy lifestyle than secondary school pupils, whereas secondary school pupils tend to think a little. Next slide, please. And then we also have, we look at demand. So there's 2 kind of terms we use here. The first is latent demand. So this is any demand for sport. 93% of pupils in Wales have a latent demand to do more sport. So 93% of pupils press that they would like to do more of certain sports. Next slide, please. Then we've also started using this term unmet demand. So these are pupils who don't participate in sport frequently, who would like to participate in more sport. So 56% of pupils in Wales have unmet demand to do more sport. Next slide, please. And if we look at this by free school meal quartiles, it kind of shows the opposite pattern to participation. So those in the most deprived schools are more likely to have unmet demand for sport than those in the least deprived schools. Next slide, please. And then we also ask a question with the title, I would do more sport if, and give pupils a suite of different response options. So here you can see the top options that were selected by boys and girls. So if there were more sport opportunities that suited me, if I had more time, and if it was easier to get to, or if I was more confident, were kind of the top reasons that people said they would do more sport. So again, kind of resource opportunity based, and then also pretty surrounded by confidence factors as well. And you can also see there that girls tended to press the options more than boys. So girls had more reasons that they would do more sport and more barriers, I guess, to doing more sport. Next slide, please. And now I'll pass it back to Helena. Thank you.
So the enjoyment section focuses on exploring pupils' experience in sport. So if we go to the next slide, pupils were given the opportunity to rate how much they enjoyed participating in each of these settings, and they could either say that they enjoyed participating in these settings a lot, a little, or not at all. This graph looks at the proportion of pupils who said that they enjoyed participating in each of these settings a lot. So we can see that those could we go back? That pupils said that they enjoyed participating a lot in PE lessons and somewhere else, followed by community sport and then extracurricular sport. So if we go to the next slide, sorry. When we break these down by the demographic factors, we see differences across these populations. So if we go to the next slide, we can see that we start to see those trends creeping through again. So boys are more likely to say that they enjoy participating in these settings than girls and those who identify their gender as other. Younger cohorts are more likely to say they enjoy participating in these settings a lot compared to older cohorts. And those with no disability or impairment are more likely to say that they enjoy participating in these settings a lot compared to those with a disability or impairment. When we look at the socioeconomic deprivation, if we go to the next slide, we can see that the trend is slightly different, and those from the most deprived schools are more likely to say that they enjoyed participating in PE a lot compared to those from their more affluent peers. But then when we look at enjoyment of extracurricular sport a lot and enjoyment of community sport a lot, those from the least deprived communities were most likely to say this. So if we move on to the next slide, this explores confidence, people's confidence to try new sports. In 2015, we found that those who said that they were very confident in trying new activities were twice as likely to be participating in sport 3 or more times per week compared to those who said that they were less confident. So we can see the role that confidence has in engaging in sport and activity there. And this is broken down by gender. So we can see that boys are more likely to say that they were very confident in trying new sports. Boys and girls were equally likely to say that they were quite confident, but then girls were more likely to say that they were not very confident or not confident at all than boys. So if we go to the next slide, and I think we're handing back to Seth. Thank you.
Thanks, Emma, and thanks, Amy, as well, for sort of eloquently taking us through all of those results. And I think it's worth reiterating as well that this isn't the full extent of results that we have or can share. It's just what we felt was most pertinent or necessary today to share. But the survey is a big survey, and there are 2 aspects to it. So there is a lot of data that we hold, and I'll touch upon really in a little while, or a little bit now, of how we plan to look at that in the coming months. But I think as we kind of wrap up, it was worth me going through a couple of things, what already, what next, and more. So in terms of what already, I'd like to touch upon what we've already produced at the close of the survey. So if you take us to the next slide, please. On the 11th of October, so a month and a half or 2 months ago, we officially published the results of the 2022 School Sports Survey on our website. Now, that publication included both the State of the Nation report and, thank you to Data Cymru, national data tables. And both of those resources, they're available for you to download directly from our website. If you take us to the next slide, please. We have also in the last month produced and shared local authority reports and data tables with those local authorities across Wales. So the local authority reports, they're a nice to look at breakdown of the results pertaining to those local authorities, where the local authority data tables, again, in thanks to Data Cymru, are extensive data files which break down a lot of information there pertinent to those local authorities. We were also pleased and able to share local authority infographics with local authorities and with regional sport partnerships. I think it's also worth mentioning here that in both the reports, the data tables, and as I mentioned in the infographics, we were able to nest the local authority results underneath or within regional results. So the local authority can see the role that they play within their region and indeed within Wales. So if you take us to the next slide, please. So in a similar vein, we were also able, and we have been also able to share over the last month, sport reports and sport data tables with national governing bodies. Again, the sport report is that nice to look at breakdown or summary of the results, and the sport data tables then are that extensive view of the data. We're still in the process of sharing those sport reports with national governing bodies. We've shared 2/3 of them in this coming week now. So by the end of the day tomorrow, we hope to share the remaining sport reports with those sports. So if you take us to the next slide, please. So it's worth me touching upon what next, and that what next really is what we have been consumed with within the Insight team at Sport Wales over the last month. So based on the resources that we've already been able to produce, so that be it the reports or the data tables, we have begun and are doing conversations with those who are engaging with the results. So we've gone to speak to regions and the local authorities within those regions, and we've begun speaking directly with sports. And those conversations really centre around what the data looks like for them in their area or their sport, and what it means for them, and how they can use that data to then go on and make a difference within their given area. Really emphasising that that point that I made at the start about the need to listen to the pupil voice and to be person-centred. And if you take us to the next slide, please. And I've put here and more because in truth there's a lot more that we want to do as Sport Wales and within the Insight team with the data. As I said, the last couple of months have really just been consumed with producing those reports, those data tables, those infographics for those who really need them in the short term. What we would like to do come January is really sit down with our data and to get to know it even better. There is so much that we can explore. And there's so many gems, I think, within the data that will sort of emerge as we sit down with it. So as an Insight team, that will be our plan and our goal and our strategy, particularly in January, to really get to know our data even better beyond the headline and the top level surface things. What we're also looking to do is look at new and engaging ways of presenting and sharing that data. And I think what's important to mention as well is that we're not just going to stop at the data level. We think and we hope that the data will point us to avenues and opportunities of particular interest to us and to those we work with. And what we'd like to do then is perhaps do some qualitative research on the back of that to dig a little deeper. So, for example, the survey might point to something of particular interest within socioeconomic groups, those free school meal quotas that Hannah mentioned. And then what it might be that we do a particular project and a particular research strategy, looking at the differences within the research and within sort of the experiences of those from different socioeconomic groups. So in summary, really, we plan to do a lot more with it, and I assume that's going to consume us as an Insight team for the next year or more. So if you take us to the next slide. And it's just for me to say then, before we take any questions, is a big thank you really to everybody who's presented, Hannah and Amy, and to you for listening today. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you all very much. Very, very interesting. So as I said at the beginning, if there are any questions, please add them to the chat. I have got a question, but it's not it's not necessarily hugely appropriate to the discussion we're having today, which sounds really bizarre, but it just jumped out to me, I guess. And whilst we're waiting for questions, although one has just arrived, I will pose it. Obviously, you said when you're looking at the various different kind of participation, all breakdowns really, and you look at the deprivation levels, you are using free school meal eligibility as a kind of indicator of the different deprivation levels. Given the changes that are coming to free school meals, and obviously with the universal free school meal rollout, and the fact that we'll have less information about free school meals going forward, have you had any thoughts as to how you might kind of address that going forward? As I said, it's not hugely appropriate, but it's just something that caught my eye.
I'm looking ahead. I don't know if you want to take it because you took it the other day, but I'm happy to jump in if you want.
I don't mind. As far as I'm aware, like that, obviously the changes are going to have implications for how we sort of analyse the data by those kind of socioeconomic factors. We're in discussion internally, but also consulting with partners about the best way to do this. Obviously, we've got we can always look at the Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation. We've had this kind of suggestion or request to focus on the role that rurality plays. So it's not necessarily a decision that we've sort of come to yet, but it's something that is of discussion at the moment, because we know that it's going to have an impact for us later. I don't know if Steph's got anything else to add to that.
No, nothing really, apart from just to reiterate that conversation will sort of continue, and I assume immediately. after this, you know, in the coming year now, to look at what we do from now on. But it's very much a conversation around the best approach going forward, not a decision per se that we would take in isolation.
Absolutely, and it's going to affect many organisations in exactly the same way as well, isn't it? Interestingly, the question that's been posed is actually about free school meals as well. I'd be thrilled to know. Actually, this is a lot much more appropriate though. Can you describe the free school meal distribution that you show? You know, your FSM 1, 2, 3, and 4, and what are your takeaways relating to your targets from that?
So, oh, go on, you go, Steph.
No, you go. You start.
So the way that we calculate the free school meal bands is related to the proportion of pupils who are eligible to receive free school meals within each school. And then essentially the schools are divvied up into equal quartiles. So what we're doing is, the assumption that we're making is that those in the sort of free school meal, the schools that have a high proportion of pupils eligible to receive a free school meal, they're sort of representing what we would consider to be the most deprived community in that school. And then those with the fewest pupils eligible to receive a free school meal in that school, we'd consider those to be the sort of least deprived schools. So they're almost representing that cohort when they depending on the proportion of pupils within the school that are eligible to receive a free school meal. In terms of what those targets are, I think, and Steph will, you know, elaborate if I've missed anything, but that's exactly what we want to find out after Christmas. Is our next goal is to think about what the implications are in terms of what this data can tell us to do. Obviously, one of the things that we are looking at is improving, you know, equality, diversity, and inclusion across the sports sector. And obviously the introduction of sport partnerships is kind of like our key change that's trying to sort of tackle that issue. So exactly what those suggestions from the data are, we need to find that out ourselves. But we've got a few things sort of in motion that we, you know, essentially have that aim of improving the sort of equality across the sports sector.
Yeah, if I could just add to that as well, and it's a perfect sort of description of what our plans are really. As Helena shared during the, you know, sharing the results, what we do know that at this point is that those who are the most deprived participate less than the least deprived. What we also know is that gap has widened over the last 4 years, and with the current climate, the assumption would be that that would stay the same, if not get worse, because of sort of the living crisis that we are currently living. So we know there is something to resolve and something to work through as a sector and beyond. But we also know, again, as Helena shared, I think as Amy shared, that there is potential here to address that in terms of sport participation. Because if we looked at that unmet demand graph, what we know is that those in the most deprived schools have a greater demand or unmet demand for sport. So it's not as if those in the most deprived communities don't do it and don't want to do it. There is a desire there for sporting activity and a desire for physical activity. The solution then will be, how do we address that? How do we work with those communities, and in a very intersectional way as well, in addressing the barriers that they face? And it was just to reiterate a couple of things that Helena said as well. In the targets, or our target, is a really interesting concept here. Obviously, Sport Wales have a role to play in looking at what that data means at a more nuanced level. We also have a role to play in terms of where we invest and what we do in terms of a delivery, from a delivery point of view as well. But my personal view is that we have a greater role here in having conversations with those who can make a difference and empowering those who can work on those solutions and work with those communities. So I think those sport conversations that I referenced are a real good case in point, in that some sports will be closer to those most deprived communities than other sports. In the same way where Helena talked about the regional sport partnerships, within that regional sport partnership makeup, there will be certain partners which are better placed to address this than others. So I think it's us working with those partners and working with those sports, trying to identify who can make the biggest difference and impact here, and how do we work with them and empower them, and then leave those other sports, those other partners, to make a difference in the areas that they do best. So I think there's a bit of strategic thinking here, and a real need for conversation in thinking who is best placed to deliver what in what areas to make the biggest difference.
Absolutely, thank you very much. If you've got any more questions, obviously there is more coming through. Can I ask Helen, though, Helen, to move on to the last slide as well, please? Sorry. And then just a follow-up. Oh, have we? Thank you. There's some slides with it. So the Welsh language field was a surprise. Is there some notion or consideration attached to that?
I can answer the first part. It's not a surprise in that we see that consistently through the 2015 and 18 surveys as well, in that those who can speak the Welsh language tend to participate more than those who do not. There may be some intersectionality playing its part there, where, you know, those from the Welsh language, do they live in typically more affluent areas than those who do not? So it's some exploratory work to go there. I'm not sure what the second part of that question is getting at, though. So I don't know if you can elaborate there.
Okay. Dav, if you are able to elaborate, please do so. No pressure now. So as we're waiting for that to come through, if it wants to, what we will say and what we do normally say is, if there are questions that you do have, but you either don't thinking, but he doesn't want it, but you don't want to add whilst the session is while the webinar is in session, or you think of afterwards, hopefully the chat function from this session will be available once we all leave. If that is the case, then please feel free to add your questions in there afterwards, and hopefully our colleagues from Sports World will be able to access it and respond that way as well, if that is easier for you. We did just scroll through some last slides then. Were they slides that you need to cover, or are we okay to finish here with?
No, they were just in case that we
Fine.
sort of related to a question. Just to add to Dav's, in case this is what he was getting at, or part of the answer is that even though that the Welsh language figure was higher than the non-Welsh language figure, what I would say is that still less than half of those who speak the Welsh language participate in sport 3 or more times a week. So even though it is better, that figure, than those who do not speak Welsh, I wouldn't say it's a fantastic figure. There's still clearly a lot of work to do with both communities. So I think that's a point that is also pertinent to the other stats we showed as well. So because one is higher than the other, for example, if we're talking about free school meal quotas, just because the least deprived seem to be better off than the most deprived, it doesn't mean there's not still work to do. And I think that relates into the Welsh language stats as well.
Excellent, thank you very much all. So there are no further questions coming through in the chat. So I think if everybody's happy, we'll draw a line. As I say, there's our contact details on the screen there. So if anybody wants to get in touch with us at Data Cymru, then you can there. And hopefully the chat function will stay live after the event, and then you can raise any questions if you do think of any more at that point. So really, it just remains for me to thank Stefan, Helena and Amy very, very much for today's session. It was really useful. I hope you all found it useful, and anybody watching after the event has also found it useful. So thank you very much. There is a follow-up question come in. Is there other considerations SAT work here as well? Rurality was an interesting point. Is this something to do with generic physical activity? Any other considerations at work here as well? Rurality was an interesting point. Is this something to do with generic physical activity?
I think from my perspective that the answer kind of applies to sort of both of those questions. And obviously this not to sound like a cop-out, but these are the things that we want to dig into as well. We've got so much more questions to ask the data, and what we want to understand are the factors that are at play. So for example, with the Welsh language one, obviously, as Steph said, there's still work to be done, but you could interpret it that something is going right across the pupils that are speaking Welsh language, and we can have a look into what that model is and potentially start applying it and enhancing it across the rest of the sector as well. But we need to understand the why behind what the figures are at the moment. We know that the trends are similar or worsening compared to previous iterations of the survey, but in terms of what those mediating factors are at the moment, we aren't 100% sure, and that's exactly what we want to find. So part of the benefit of having these conversations now in disseminating the research and you posing these questions that we have invested interest in finding out as well, is that we can really tailor what we do with the data after Christmas and start to get to the bottom of some of them so that we can kind of think about how we want to put them into action then. So I hope that doesn't sound like a cop-out, but you're asking all the questions that we're asking as well, and we're quite excited to start digging down and answering them.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I will draw it to a close now. If there are more questions, staff, like I say, feel free to keep asking them in the chat function afterwards. So again, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your input, and we're really grateful for it. And I'm going to stop the recording.